Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I decided when I went to Japan, I started doing events, doing parties and bringing DJs over and things like that from New York, because I found out that Japanese was very keen on what was happening in the US and what was happening in London, specifically New York and London. And so I had connections in both places. I'd been spending time in London. I knew a lot of the guys in the scene in London. I knew Jazzy B, before Soul to Soul. I knew a lot of the guys like Alex Baby and, a bunch of those guys, Michael Koppelman and James LeBon and these guys. And so because I could do whatever I wanted in Japan as far as bringing DJs and doing events. So I decided to do a Stussy tribe gathering. So because what Sean had done is he had started to connect with people in LA and London and New York and Paris and Tokyo. And so there was this loosely organized tribe, he called it, of guys. Some skated, some were DJs, some were graphic designers, some were musicians. Goldie was part of it, and
wow.
Yeah, all these different guys. It was, and Sean Stussy was the guy who thought of it. I mean, it was sort of, no one discussed it. No one said to me this was what was going on. But if you knew, you knew. And so I decided to bring everybody together and bring them to Tokyo and have a party. And we all DJ'd and everyone came, and it was a success. And it was decided or thought by some that was sort of the beginning of streetwear, because at that point the world had to take notice that streetwear really meant something. And most of the guys that were at that event that I brought over are now, major players in the game. One of which, James Jebbia, who worked for Sean Stussy, he started Supreme inside of Stussy. So Supreme came out of Stussy, which was an extension of what we were doing in the 80s and what I decided to do in Tokyo with the Stussy tribe. But, guys like Michael Koppelman, who's, he's a boss in the streetwear scene in Europe. Kim Jones, who's now at Dior, used to work for him. So it kind of all spreads itself out. And now, every brand has a sneaker, and, kids they consider themselves sneakerheads and collect sneakers and things like that. So I sort of saw and was around and sort of an advocate, not even thinking about trying to monetize it. I always thought being fresh was something to do, and that's just who I was, and because I had,
and to this day, brother,
that's just
you got it or you don't, and this really echoes, the whole thing. I wanted to touch on, and thank you very much, brother, for sharing these amazing stories, because that's exactly echoing the epitome of what we're trying to tap into, and I think. Brother Coréon Dú, you can maybe definitely add quite a lot to what Brother Lono Brazil just shared, especially coming from what your contribution was for the whole, also helping Kuduro as a movement, as a sound, branch out of Angola. Through the festivals, through the movie, the documentary that you produced, the styling. I mean, we do Friends, we do your whole brand, like even you, like, bro, go ahead, man.
Which is a documentary that I did about what we're talking about why people love our style.
Let's go, brother. Hit us with the knowledge.
Well, I will say this. A lot of things that Lono was saying definitely do resonate. Actually, still till this day, I'm not sure about the other realities, but especially about Angolan and especially Luandan style, and I think a lot of it was fueled by Kuduro culture, because I would say that for the most part, this was like me growing up, and even now, most people are quite conformist, and that's just a worldwide, a human thing. Most humans, we like to conform, we like to find our tribe, etc. And when I was growing up, something called Kuduro emerged, And one of the things that fascinated me the most is that although it started as a music movement, it kind of evolved and attracted a specific kind of person, and mainly of the younger generation, which is pretty much people who are not afraid to experiment, who are like to mix two things that they think make no sense whatsoever together, and they work. And this started with, I just remember like back in the day going to a party and having a DJ who was mixing, and this was when they were like doing like live mixing with vinyls, like a techno track, and then a carnival, like a carnival song from like Os Quiesos, and trying to make something new happen, or or just speeding up the BPMs on random things. And I think that lack of fear for experimentation is quite interesting, and is still very much existent in a lot of, I would say, not just Angolan but African style, because let's not forget that a lot of people, especially in the continent, do not shop in retail locations. We shop at the market. There's a lot of second-hand buying, and we have to make old things look new, or we have to make that shirt that our auntie made us, mix it with our own personal style and make it look fresh. So I think since
Yeah.
there is that constant reinvention of how to use the same thing in many different ways, that really does inform a lot of how a lot, especially if we look at the urban African environment, how people deal with how we present themselves. Well, especially in the Central African region, including Angola, there's this slogan pretty much, which is looking good is the closest you'll always be to feeling good. So, and being good. So
Very true.
if you look good, most people will think you're a good person, and that will make
And
you
if you
feel good.
smell good as well.
Exactly. So, and as for that part, let's also not forget one thing, and this is something quite African. A lot of a lot of things that made, and I know this is going to be sound problematic, but people can look this up in history. But if, a few thousand years ago, a lot of the things that made Europeans civilized did not come from Europe. A
Mhm.
lot of them came from either Africa or, Central and South America. Because let's
100%.
just say that our empires had indoor plumbing before it hit Europe, and Africans introduced
Absolutely,
algebra to Europe,
absolutely.
and many, and architecture and many other things. So, in terms of self-presentation, there is a historical reason for why not all but most Africans have a relationship with how we present themselves. Obviously, obviously, there's two versions of it. People who are really into self identity are probably, I think, the ones who are expressing it more truly, because in many African cultures, and this is from north to south, east to west, there is a care about how you present your look, and a lot of the times is because let's not forget that a lot of our histories, not just histories, are oral traditions or things that pass generationally. So one thing, and I was speaking, for example, to the late king of the Chokwe kingdom, which goes from like Angola almost all the way to East Africa, and he was saying, yes, the reason like I dress the way I dress because I'm wearing like my great grandfather's staff and the piece of jewelry that I inherited from this ancestor, this that I'm going to give to my son, and then he created, obviously he had a traditional reason of being, but the way he presents it and puts it together is very much his own. So we're constantly taking these, I would say, visual and cultural references from various parts of the world and making it into one cohesive thing, which I think is quite interesting. Not just now talking about Africans, but even diaspora, because I think as
Yeah, but
well,
in
especially to
general, I
places that were colonized,
think
we have to
Drew,
kind of create that new identity.
Armando, go ahead.
the whole fashion industry embedded himself into the our popular culture. I think, you know, you can go back to, you know, 1920s and up until now. If you look at fashion,
Us
it's different fashion today. Where
as
those references are
Picasso.
coming from?
Like even from visual arts, hey,
Yeah,
without African art, there would be no Picasso.
exactly.
That's incredible.
Exactly.
That's
So
actually very
I think
true.
No,
it's important. And then
that's
which
something a lot of people don't know.
That's true.
Or Yves Saint Laurent.
yeah, but exactly. So like, that's the problem again. If you look, even when you look at fashion as a whole today, you know, fashion always embedded themselves into the black popular culture, sneaker culture, the hairstyle, the oversized
Hmm.
trends. You can go on and on and on and on, and all these things can be traced back to the roots, the origin. And as
Yeah.
to what both of you are saying, and even for you, Coréon Dú, as the producer of the beautiful, you know, documentary Bangladesh, it's, you know, it really represents what is very important, which is the sapeur is pretty much the same thing. Dressing up is a sense of pride, is a sense of
Hmm.
identity for in Africa and for Africans. And for me, even when I look at myself, it's the way I put myself is it's just, you know, an extension of who I am, and I want to be proud. I want to be represent myself in the best way possible. And I think this is something ancestral that's always been with us for many years.
Yeah.
And that brings me back to recent presentations you guys talking about, the Louis Vuitton show. To me, you might look at that and think that's like, you know, like you said, is the sapeurs or is the. I think that's almost like a year of return going back to Ghana. It looks like
Hmm.
all of these, you know, the kings from Ghana back in the day, the way they put themselves together and all that stuff. And it's funny because most of you guys that have my personal Instagram will see that exactly one of the slippers that I'm developing with the same fabric, it kind of resonated. Almost the patterns were quite similar to what Louis Vuitton presented recently, you know. And when you look at that, where you got that from? My own connection when I see that is that Virgil really went in deep to say, I'm gonna really try to see where my roots is here, which is Ghanaian or Nigerian, whatever that is. Back in the day, during the period of Mansa Musa, the whole area was Mali Empire, and the whole thing, Guinea-Bissau was part
Yeah.
of Mali Empire as well before the Portuguese. So it's all coming from one place, and I think again to touch on the most important subject, which I've been advocating on since the killing of George Floyd, is that we really truly need to know ourselves where we came from. That's the most important path that we have in order to be free on our mind and liberate ourselves and connect together. Because it's everything. When you look at it from every angle, it's coming from one source. And you can trace it back. It's taking it all the way back to that. You know what I mean? So
But therefore, allow me to ask you a
it's
question,
a great
Armando,
time
because
that we have in these conversations now.
oh,
Sure.
it is, and I want you to answer a question, please, as we talk about this African and when I say African, again, I include in that conversation African Americans, Caribbeans of African descent, etc. And anyone with African blood, including
We all came from
the less
Africa,
melanated.
as history said.
Huh? But especially for us,
Am I
the
live?
importance of shoes, brother, the importance of shoes for us, please, because you are an exquisite shoemaker. Please speak on that, brother. We need to understand, why is shoes so important for us? Why making sure that they're well polished, that we have the right shoe, the right color with the right outfit? Tell us about this, Baba.
Well, my connection with
Armando.
making well-made
Sorry.
shoes and yes.
Before you go on your answer, please also tell us, why did you choose shoes? Because everybody else who is clothes, whatever, it was very impressive to me that in a very early stage you chose shoes. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's easy to answer that question and move on to explain myself broadly. Choose for one reason. I think for me, I started connecting the dots now. Growing up, my parents, we were seven, in a house where my parents did their best. They kind of give us the basics of life. Migrated from from Portugal, and then we had the basics. We didn't have everything we wanted. So shoes was very scarce. So I think I had about, growing up, if I remember, I had very little, like maybe 2 or 3 pair of shoes. And then they would be open up and stuff. But I've always really liked shoes. And, I don't know if that's really what stayed in me as I grew up and I started modeling. I always had a fascination with shoes. I always start with shoes because I think it's a very important accessory. We can put, as a man, for example, for us, you can put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and, you're good. But I think shoes was just that way, is an accessory to me that was very important to kind of like show yourself, your identity, and, and really communicate yourself through fashion. And so, it developed throughout the years with, modeling, traveling, and seeing all different pairs of shoes. And I was like, if I have the opportunity to do something one day within the field of fashion, it will be shoes, it won't be clothes, because I think it was always easy to find different brands of clothes. Obviously now you have just a brand of shoes, but before it was just sort of like an extension of already existing, company that makes clothing that decided to kind of, open up their offering and then make shoes. I've always believed in specialization. If you specialize in something, you become good at it. And shoes was one thing that I wanted to be very good at. And so that's the whole thing behind it. But it's probably started earlier because I didn't have that many pairs of shoes growing up. But again, shoes is important. And to me, I'll speak on my experience. As I said earlier, a lot of people associated me, my modeling career, with what I represented, the brands that I work with. And in that, I developed my own sensibility about fashion, what I like, what I think I should, represent if I ever do anything within that field. So it was always important for me to do something with quality. And I don't know about you guys, but I know that we are always judged. They're like, he's going to do shoes. Let's see how good or how bad it's going to be. So I did not want anybody to judge that, because I grew up with my mother saying this to me. When you're building up a house, make sure brick upon brick, you take intervals, you step back, you look at it. So nobody that's passing by will tell you, ooh, it's a little crooked like that. So when you go all the way up, and before you put the roof, somebody say, yeah, but the house is like this. So I've always, gravitated towards quality. I think is important, and I think especially in other ways, I think shoes is something important for our health. If you don't have the right shoes, depending on the type of job you do, the way you walk, if you stand on your feet, all those things have impact. And as a model, I think that that was one of the first things you would know when the shoe is really bad, because it hurts. You're standing on it, and there's backstage before the show, you stand for hours before the show starts. You're dressed up and you stand. If the shoes is not comfortable, then you really feel it. And so all of those components to me were very important to kind of like make sure that whatever I do, especially shoes, is something of quality. And that's really the reasons behind it.